Hey there, everybody. My name is Chris Whitesides, and I'm coming at you from California State University Northridge Associate Students Outdoor Adventures for a virtual tour along with travel tips to Iceland, where I was lucky enough to go this past summer. As usual, we'll be using our friend Google Earth as we zoom all around the globe and really look at some 360-degree shots from the country itself. The country of Iceland is located just below the Arctic Circle. Only a little bit of it is actually up inside that latitude spinning around. And it is not to be confused with the big old land of ice, which is Greenland. It is the smaller Greenland of Iceland. Perfectly confusing, right? In the vein of me being confusing, let's watch a science video with someone with a cooler accent than me and a better way of explaining just how this island formed. Crystal clear, right? In a way cooler accent than I have, as we explain why the heck these images, the geologic formations, are going to look the way that they do. That combination of tectonic plates moving and sliding apart from each other, plus all that volcanic activity, gives this nation a really distinct look that you may recognize as we jump into it from a whole lot of media, movies, TV. All of a sudden you'll say, hey, I recognize all those wild places that look like they're from a different planet. But they're not. They're from Iceland, which in of itself is a autonomous, sovereign nation. It used to be a part of Denmark, but now it is its own thing. And it is usually lumped in with some of these words like Nordic, Norden, and Scandinavian. Nordic and Norden, both referring to the north in Scandinavian languages. More commonly, Scandinavian is used when talking about a select few of these Nordic countries. Those more Scandinavian countries, and this is all open to be argued with, referring to Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. But for a lot of the times, these terms are used interchangeably. What's not interchangeable is the culture and the language of these places, which is all unique with some overlap. A lot of the culture that we see, or I see in the US, comes from Marvel movies, strangely enough. But Norse mythology is a big kind of shared oral tradition throughout some of these regions. And that oral tradition is also referred to as skalds, S-K-L-D, being spoken word poems, narratives, or sagas, longer stories or episodic oral traditions about some of these larger than life characters in that Norse mythology. Thor, Odin, Loki, a lot of names again from Marvel, started way earlier than that. But the human history of Iceland is not that old, not as old as Odin, at least. Viking and those Nordic peoples, seafaring groups, came to the island or a handful of these islands in their travels to Greenland, to Iceland, and even to Vinland, which was their name for North America. That's right, some of our Viking explorers may have found North America, air quotes, found, but well before Christopher Columbus's documented, air quotes, discovery. The first person to find Iceland, or more apropos, permanently settle Iceland, was this really hard to pronounce name, Ingolfur Arnason, who founded the first permanent settlement in the city of Reykjavik, which is now the capital of Iceland. It's the largest city and really the only city. Shoot, it's the only city with a Costco, that's for sure, on the entire island. But Reykjavik is home to about 130,000 people. For my Californians out here, that's about the size of Pasadena or Salinas, with the entire nation having only 330,000 people as a population. Again, for my Californians, that's Bakersfield as its own nation, which is pretty wild. And they still field a competitive football club out of it. But Reykjavik, meaning the smoke city, as a rough translation, was that first very big definitive settlement by Mr. Arnason, who decided on the location with the traditional way of deciding those things by casting high seat pillars or big wooden columns into the ocean as he's floating around and he could see the coastline. Where those high-seated pillars ended up was where he established Reykjavik. What also may have contributed to that was a more lowland area where they could do some farming and a whole bunch of hot springs and geothermal activity, which made the winters far more survivable. Reykjavik loosely translates to smoke city from the smoke and natural steam coming off of those hot springs. Another gentleman that is relatively famous, in Iceland and in Reykjavik is Leif Erikson. Not a direct descendant of Arnason, I don't think. Check my facts on all these for sure. Using facts loosely. Leif Erikson was the son of Eric the Red and most famous for discovering Vinland or North America. Some of these Viking seafaring routes went from Scandinavia, the Scandinavian countries, and moved using Iceland as a stopping spot on their way to Greenland, then into North America and present day Canada or Newfoundland, where Vinland was one of the places that was coined. Leif Erikson is definitely the Icelandic people are very proud to claim Leif Erikson as being born in Iceland, as well as very definitively discovering Vinland, although some of that is up for debate and argument. Through these oral sagas, there's not a very super definitive written history and evidence of some of those explorations, but I think it makes a really cool story and may darn well be true. Reykjavik is wonderful and awesome, and close to Reykjavik is Blue Lagoon. About 30 minutes away from Reykjavik is the major airport into the nation, and the Blue Lagoon just about splits that travel distance in half and makes for a great stop at seeing why Reykjavik is the smoke city. The Blue Lagoon and its geothermal waters, right? Those plates pulling apart, hot water being, in this case, pumped 2,000 meters from below the earth to the surface, and all that steam and smoke that will later give the city its name, makes for these wonderful geothermal, warm, hot springs with a whole bunch of silica in the water, which gives it this white, milky hue, and is also supposed to be pretty darn good for your skin. Blue Lagoon is a relatively pricey spa, but a really good first thing to visit and immerse yourself in geothermal waters with the volcanic rock all around you in these kind of low tundra, almost highlands. A really cool first stop. Again, we start our journey with the airport over right on the side of this peninsula. The Blue Lagoon was our first stop. Then we're crashing in Reykjavik for a day or two. It's probably a good call. Things to see, culture to experience. The rest of my experience, my trip, and the trip that I'm going to virtually take you on goes to three major tourist regions. The first being the Snæfellsnes, and I butchered that pronunciation too, Peninsula in the north, the Golden Circle in the kind of moving to the inland, and then finally the south coast towards Vik are going to be the three runs that we look at. All of these names are really hard to pronounce, and I'll keep apologizing for it. They're so hard that on our Uber from the airport into Reykjavik, which there are no Ubers there, on our ride share into Reykjavik, our driver did not want to pronounce the name of a local volcano that was actively erupting because his tongue would get tired. So when the Icelandic natives don't want to pronounce their own words, I think I should get a pass from pronouncing those words. But we're going to check out again this Snæfellsnes Peninsula, the inland Golden Circle, and then the south coast on our way to Vik. This is all part of the larger, the real goal for folks with a little bit more disposable income than I, as we travel the entire ring road around the nation of Iceland. Super doable, whether you're camping, whether you're staying at Airbnbs, but again, takes a little bit more time to do and complete. Let's check out the most famous spot on the peninsula, which is Kirkjufell, which you may recognize from TV shows like Game of Thrones. Kirkjufell Mountain is a popular hiking destination, although it's a little challenging. And there are also a waterfall making for these really famous panoramic shots of Kirkjufell Foss, the Icelandic word for waterfall, and the mountaintop itself. Like we said, you can hike that mountain, just like Tormund. I didn't think I'd remember it from Game of Thrones. I don't know if they actually hiked to the top. But it's an hour-and-a-half hike that's relatively arduous and a little bit dangerous at that very top, as we need to use ropes to scramble to the peak. So not for the faint of heart and not for folks with vertigo, unfortunately, which this picture is giving me a little bit of. We'll keep moving from the Snæfellsnes, I think it's a hard I sounded there, Snæfellsnes Peninsula, into that Golden Circle as we come to one of three national parks in the country. This national park is Thingvellir, which is famous for Oxafrost, this waterfall, and our weather is a little bit more indicative of Icelandic summers. We got a lot of overcast days, not a lot of sunny and 75s. But Thingvellir might be more famous, not for the Oxafoss, but being an inland lake in which you can snorkel and scuba dive between, you got it, those two tectonic plates, the North American plate and the Eurasian plate. Really cool activity that I don't know if you can do anywhere else in the world. Swimming around between two tectonic plates that are racing apart from each other at 2 centimeters a year. A really unique thing to experience in Thingvellir National Park, which is stop one on our tour of the Golden Circle. Another popular stop on that Golden Circle run is Geyser Park. Not a national park, but geothermal activity in this area creates relatively routine and regular thermal eruptions, water eruptions, not like magma eruptions, in the form of, I believe there were 2 active geysers going off while we were there, with the main one going off about every 15 minutes. This was a nicer day that we would hit something would look like this, where you could see in for miles and miles in any direction, and the ground was moist after it had just rained. We were trying to rush and see some stuff before those rains caught up to us. Geyser Park was a pretty small, nice little stop, and easy accessible trails to access those viewing platforms. Another popular stop on the Golden Circle is Gulfoss, a massive, massive foss waterfall, again, with really easy accessible trails to get to, as you could view it from a top lookout from here or by really hiking straight down. And it was unique to see the drone culture was relatively strong at some of these locales. Something pretty unique, or not unique, something relatively frowned upon in the wilderness spaces of the US. Speaking specifically for California, I feel like drones usually are restricted and argued against, but there were cool opportunities or even spaces where it was encouraged to do traditional drones or POV, point of view drones, where you'd wear a headset. You're obviously bringing your own drone in this situation. You'd wear a headset to fly fast down these canyons, which when it's done in a safe way that's not an annoyance or a nuisance to others, I think it can yield really cool images and videos like this one of Gulfoss. Just another short and sweet stop as we go along the Golden Circle. Other things to do in the Golden Circle, there was whitewater rafting. Every small town seemed to have its own geothermal pools to check out and explore. But I thought the pinnacle, the peak of the Golden Circle ended up in Landmannalaugar, which is a kind of high mountainous base camp to which there's a whole bunch of different hikes, day hikes or backpacking hikes that you can go out of this base camp. These windswept rhyolite mountains were phenomenal to see, super unique looking, like nothing we have in California at least, and made for great hiking around the volcanic rock, around the lakes along the way in. But it was an arduous, relatively long, I think it was a full hour of off-road travel. So make sure you have that all-wheel drive rental vehicle and gas, which was like $8 a gallon. To get out to this spot. Depending on the season that you go, there's also some times when you need to drive through rivers or waterways too. So not for the faint of heart, the drive or the hikes to go out to Landmannalaugar, but definitely worth the trip. Like I was saying, there are a whole handful of different hikes that leave from this kind of primary base camp, so you can explore around, whether it's a single day or whether you're doing some longer term backpacking. In one of the longest hikes, I think one of the most popular, at least they had an outfitter doing a shuttle to and from, was from Landmannalaugar to the south coast. Not a route that you can drive. You can't drive here, you need to go back the way you came towards the Golden Circle down to the south coast. But you could hike from Landmannalaugar down to Skogarfoss, which was, you got it, just another massive waterfall. And for these, I think 3 or 4 waterfalls we've seen, literally on your drive around that ring road, you're seeing a waterfall darn near every 10 minutes, if not more frequently, as these cliffs kind of wrap around the inland of the nation as you drive those coastal roads, making for beautiful drives. A lot of these waterfalls had hiking trails where you could easily where the top of the waterfall was easily accessible too. So you always got kind of 2 views for the price of 1 with all of it. Land management agencies changed depending on where you were at. And there were not a lot of park entrance fees or access fees like we unfortunately see in California, where I feel like they ding you for parking for anything and everything, making that aspect of the trip relatively affordable, while it did live up to its reputation as being a relatively expensive place to travel, specifically for the rental car, the gas, and then accommodations. No Motel 6s, a lot of kind of just independent mom and pop shop hotels or more bed and breakfast style. But here we are down all the way at a black sand beach, one of many, many on the south coast and near the town of Vik, just on the other side of these rock formations. These beaches, these cliffs, as we pan all the way around, stunning and beautiful in its own right. I thought they were awesome and probably most famous for their inhabitants, the puffin, a pelagic bird that spends most of its life at sea. Puffins make their homes along some of the coasts of Iceland, and they live in these big colonies, which is awesome and super cute. And they live in the side of these hills as they are great swimmers, great diggers, really clumsy looking flyers, but really great flyers as well, as they'll go out to the sea to fish and then bring back those fish in those big colorful bills back to their nest, their burrow. And to my point, I had to find a video. They were the clumsiest looking flyers, as they were almost too heavy. They seemed like they were too heavy, too chubby. And even some of these takeoffs just seem really scattered and klutzy. It seems like they just fall out of the sky. But they would land in these holes, in those burrows. So I think deceptively clumsy. There's one video where it just like runs straight into the path. But really fun to watch take off as they scramble back and forth from the ocean with their fish. There he goes, he hits the path and then falls down. As they go to and from the ocean back to their burrows with Arctic terns and other gulls trying to steal the meal that these great fishermen have worked so hard to get and acquire. And you may think the puffin is the national bird of Iceland. I thought it was going to be the puffin or the Arctic tern because they're everywhere, but it's actually the gyrfalcon, another word that I'm mispronouncing. This beautiful raptor that we did not have a chance to see, but that's the national bird, not the puffin. Sorry, puffin. Maybe next time. As we continue down along the south coast, we'll see other really cool spots like glaciers. There's a massive glacier in the third of our national parks, the first being National Park on that Snæfellsnes Peninsula, a second in Thingvellir, and the third, a glacier that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. But these glaciers create also these glacial lagoons, which is just one more unique way of interacting with the environment, as you can kayak on these glacial lagoons and past these massive hyper blue ice floats that are out there. They are pseudo dangerous in that they're constantly rolling and moving. So going with a guide is supposedly the preferred way. And you get this shock blue color from the lack of oxygen frozen into the water. Ice that you get out of your fridge is kind of that like clear or whitish. This super duper blue color comes from that lack of oxygen and deep freezing that happens within the glacier. These glaciers, and our guide was painted a pretty desperate story of how much these glaciers are retreating. This image isn't from an Iceland specific glacier, but showing that glacial retreat as these walls, as these big platforms and mass of ice and snow and water with rising temperatures in these areas, longer summers, shorter winters, those glaciers are retreating at a faster and faster pace. You can see when they're filled up and what they leave behind, these big glacial valleys, which in the summer is a lot of Iceland's made of these big glacial valleys, which are fun to hike around on. And this was a picture of that glacial valley, of some of these ice falls, of the lagoon. It made for just stunning photography all the way around the island when you could find these big glaciers. We're almost near our end. Let's try and get some elevation. Again, hiking on and around these glaciers was another activity that was recommended to us with a guide, as they do represent a lot of inherent dangers and you do need some specialized equipment to go along with them. But going out on them was super rewarding and super otherworldly, and a way of seeing how people could kind of get a mystical vibe or an otherworldly vibe with these. For Icelandic folklore traditions, that otherworldliness kind of came together in the form of a lot of mythic creatures or mystic creatures, trolls being one of them. Trolls obviously just move around at night because the sun turns them to stone, but a lot of rock formations called like troll gates are given names around that troll tradition. Icelandic Yule lads apparently are 12, used to be pretty nasty, kind of like elfish dwarves that came around at Christmas and pulled pranks on naughty kids, but apparently they're getting kinder and kinder, and now they leave gifts in shoes and they're a little less nasty. Elves is another Icelandic tradition. For anyone that's seen Fire Saga on Netflix with Will Ferrell, they do a lot of poking fun at the tradition of elves, or the but it made for fun spaces of looking for those little elf homes throughout the country. And a really cool way that I just learning about this folklore is through the Netflix TV show Hilda, which takes some of these Nordic traditions, not specific to Iceland, but then kind of makes them in a palatable way for you and kids, or just me, to watch and learn about those folklore traditions. As we've been going through these shots, if anything's looked familiar, it's like we said earlier, you've probably seen and recognized some of these locales from, yep, every single sci-fi movie ever created seems to have been shot using images, distinct regions and locations from Iceland, including Oblivion with Tom Cruise, Day After Tomorrow. No. This was another Geostorm or some silly sci-fi title. Eurovision, like we said, with Will Ferrell. The Star Wars movies have used spots of the glacier to represent Hoth, or Rogue One, where Jyn Erso is living on those black sand beaches. There's a huge list of sci-fi movies, of TV shows that are shot using Iceland and all its beautiful scenery to convey that otherworldliness. So that is our quick run through of Iceland. We covered Reykjavik, that main city that you'll probably fly into in the capital, Snæfellsnes Peninsula, which I still can't pronounce, the Golden Circle, and some cool stops to see along the way, and finally the south coast moving toward Vik. There are 101 good resources online with more, better information than I have, but I hope that gave you a starting place or a starting place for further research for either your trip or just areas of interest if you want to learn more about Norse mythology, Icelandic folklore, or some of the media that was shot in Iceland. Thanks for hanging out, and we hope to see you at our next virtual tour, maybe with some other travel tips. Have a good day.